Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M. Espis. Ukraine War News Update. What is this? I guess this is an extra, giving you some further context around the White House debacle that took place. And I know there's this endless litigation of what took place, and I've already done in my live streams a lot of content on this interaction between the world leaders and how I think it was either very formally an ambush set up and it was carefully orchestrated, or it was an opportunistic ambush. But either way, I think JD Vance was at the helm there and not so much Trump. I'm not going to talk about the ambush nature of it and particularly about what took place in the talk. I've done that. Let's talk about the reaction to it, because this then sets up my next geopolitical video, which is going to be talking about the news coming out today about the meeting in London between European leaders Keir Starmer and Volodymyr Zelensky. That is as a direct response to what has taken place here. So we need to properly understand what's taken place here. And see the reaction domestically and somewhat internationally. So we're going to start, and then that will be the end of like talking about this White House incident, right? I know some of you be like, whatever, but a lot of you hopefully will be interested in this, right? CNN and take on board that there will be a selection bias in possibly how, I don't know the methodology of CNN polls and whether it's within their audience or whether they commission this poll to be done outside of the audience in the general public, but assume that there might be a selection bias here. CNN's Michael Smerconish conducted a poll on who is to blame for yesterday's White House scandal. And the poll's very interesting because Donald Trump is 50% to blame, or 50% of people think he's to blame. JD Vance, 41% of the people think he's to blame. In fact, only 4.3% think Zelensky, while 4% think all other people equally. That is a mass. If that's at least somewhat representative of the American public, then that is a good indication of really what took place there, and it feeds into this idea that it was an ambush and they were setting Zelensky up to fail, which I think is exactly what they wanted. The minerals deal wasn't really giving them what they wanted. Well, Zelensky really wanted a security guarantee in that deal that wasn't really forthcoming, and so here you go, you scupper this, you make Zelensky look like the enemy, you get closer to Russia, you get all the hydrocarbons and rare earth metal deals from Russia, as we hear that Putin has now counter-offered a minerals deal with Russia directly, and you get those minerals that are in the occupied territories as well, but Russia, then that's motivation not to have a peace deal that returns those occupied territories to Ukraine. And so, it's really, I think it's highly controversial, but I think this shows that there was probably good reason for the scuppering of the whole interaction really between Zelensky and Trump and Vance. Now, it also helps to give ammunition to pivoting towards Russia and away from the EU too, which is something I think is definitely going on here with the White House. I think they want to see the EU as enemies, and this allows them to do that as well. Anyway, let's look at the reaction more closely. And what is, I think, very important is looking at some of the newspapers in the UK. And right across the board in the UK, we have powerful rhetoric in defense of Zelensky and making the White House out to be the bad guys. Now, bear in mind, this is 2 days. These are newspaper headlines from today, and this is mainly about the meeting between Starmer and Zelensky, and also the European meeting. So, hug of hope, Starmer and Zelensky. You've got our backing. That's a People tabloid. Mirror tabloid. We've got your back. Okay. You are very welcome at number 10, Sunday Telegraph. Starmer reassures Zelensky during Downing Street visit after president's humiliation at the White House. Now, this is the key one I wanted to talk to you about, and they were pretty bad on the White House yesterday as well, if I remember correctly. Amid outrage after US President's humiliation of Zelensky and as the King hosts Ukraine leader at Sundrium today, MPs and top brass demand now stop the state visit for bully Trump. That's how to treat a war hero. PM's hug ahead of a crunch summit. Now, as others have said, if you lose the Daily Mail in the UK, that is big. Not only the biggest, most read newspaper, in fact, the Mail Online is, or certainly was, the most read news website in the world. Certainly was for some time. I don't know if it still is. But Trump losing the Mail is the British equivalent of Tucker Carlson turning on him. This is big. Like, one thing the UK almost universally detests is a bullying tyrant. This is actually quite true. It doesn't sit well with our psyche. We do not like that. Papers worldwide condemn Trump, says Anonymous. In addition, Trump has lost the Daily Mail. When you lose the Daily Mail, you are a global pariah. Quote, Trump on Friday presided over one of the greatest diplomatic disasters in modern history. Quote, a spectacle to horrify the world. Now, the Daily Mail, that's a spectacle to horrify the world, was their yesterday's one, and that was quite damning of Trump as well. So it's really interesting to see. I know this is only the UK, but there's universal distaste for what took place in the White House. Reeves unlocks billions for Kyiv and UK defence. That's the Sunday Times with Starmer and Zelensky on the front cover. Now's the time for allies to unite for peace. This is the Sunday Express. But the Daily Express is like the Daily Mail, but worse, right? In terms of, this is massively pro-Brexit, massively anti-immigration, but from a really populist point of view. Like, this is driving fear and hate, the Sunday Express. You can agree with Brexit and you can have concerns about immigration, etc., etc. That's not what I'm saying. But the Daily Express, my point is that if the Daily Express and the Daily Mail are on the side of Zelensky, then Trump's White House appearance and argument with Zelensky and JD Vance as well has gone down very badly, in the UK. This is an indication. So Keir's message, again, even calling Starmer Sir Keir, is to give him a little bit more props than they usually do. Sir Keir's message to the world as Zelensky arrives at number 10 after bruising encounter with the US president: now's the time for allies to unite for peace. And of course, the Daily Star says nothing to do with anything. But yeah, I just thought that was an interesting romp through the front pages there. I think yesterday's front page, it doesn't go through, it doesn't put the pictures, unfortunately. I really wanted to show you yesterday's ones as well, but they haven't put the pictures there. Nonetheless, we'll move on. So that tells you something. And indeed, the press review on Sky News last night, this guy writes for The Independent. The woman next to him is like a right-wing commentator, psychotherapist and commentator. Their reaction says an awful lot, and I just want to play you this.
Let's start with the only story in town, and Zelensky on British soil. The Mirror has that photo of the hug that Sir Keir Starmer extended to the president of Ukraine, in stark contrast to his reception and the basic ejection from the White House when he went to meet Donald Trump.
Yes, despite what the Star would have us believe, this is the only story in town. I must say I'm quite proud to be British tonight, and the contrast, as you rightly point out, between the reception he received in Downing Street and the vile treatment he received at the hands of Trump and Vance on Friday, which just infuriated me. It was so despicable the way they treated him. I think these are lovely headlines, actually. We've got your back, says the Mirror, and Hug of Hope, says the People. You know, the British people in polls recently have wholeheartedly backed our support of Zelensky. You could see big crowds outside number 10 cheering him as he went in today. And I think that's right. He's fighting against a tyrant. Unlike what President Trump said, he didn't start the war. He's not a dictator. Trump just doesn't get it. He thinks people who die in wars are losers. He's got no idea of the sacrifices that Zelensky and his people have made. But we seem to understand that, and that's reflected in the very warm hug between them, and the fact that Starmer has offered to give him wholehearted backing and more money, which we'll talk about later. As I say, I'm proud to be British tonight.
And it was.
It's a really fascinating statement, and I have felt that too. I'm going to, in my next geopolitical video, look at how the UK played that meeting with Starmer and Zelensky and how clever it was in Starmer not saying words against the US, but the visuals were very contrasting with the US, and that said almost more than words. And it makes me proud to be British that we are actually recognizing the obviousness of the ambush in the White House and of Trump's position on Ukraine. His hatred, I think, for Zelensky for not having given him the dirt on Hunter Biden and the Biden family. It all goes back to that impeachment that he received it wasn't a successful impeachment, but it was an impeachment as a result of trying to blackmail Ukraine and Zelensky. And I don't think he's forgiven Zelensky. And I think that is the heart of what is going on.
Was emphatic, wasn't it, the fact that Sir Keir Starmer actually walked out of Downing Street, walked a little way down to actually greet him.
It's a very proactive hug. And, you know, a picture tells 1,000 words. It's not even just the hug.
No, we're seeing
it's
it
the
there.
context of it as coming within 24 hours of what happens in the White House.
Exactly.
There is this sense that Starmer and Britain in general are making a decision as to which side we're on, because Trump himself has obviously made a decision that he's not on Zelensky and Ukraine's side, he's on Russia's side. So it's a
Well, he's actually said that he's in the middle, he's not on either side.
Well, that's completely rubbish. That is not what happened. That's not what...
I absolutely love this. So she, as someone that might otherwise be quite critical of Starmer in her other normal commentary, is saying, in terms of Trump, well, that's rubbish. It's rubbish that he's neutral in the middle, and I love it. Call it out for what it is.
What happened in the White House? That was a very, very uneven-handed ambush of Zelensky, and in a way, people have been talking about Starmer meeting Trump a couple of days before and how very civilized it was and how very measured, and it didn't seem to, escalate into anything, and that was thought a very good thing. This is a very powerful shift. Starmer is actually making a very distinctive gesture here. He's not just making this gesture for Vladimir Zelensky, he's also making this gesture for Donald Trump. Donald Trump will have seen this, and we're going to come on to the story about the meeting with the king. Donald Trump will be fully aware that what he thought was this amazing opportunity to be given a second invitation to meet the king. That's also going to be bestowed on Vladimir Zelensky tomorrow as well.
Although it's not going to be a state visit. James, do you think...
So I would question, because I often wonder about this, whether actually Donald Trump would see any of this. I know he's on social media and whatnot, but he's a busy man. Well, he's playing a lot of golf. And I don't know whether his aides will show him how the UK has reacted. I don't know. I just, that's an open question for me. Something I'm always fascinated by, which is how much does Trump know about what's going on around the world? And you could say that about any leader, I guess, because they're so busy. They're constantly being given the information they need by their aides around them. And actually, their aides hold back criticism from the UK, implicit criticism by the way that Zelensky was received by Starmer. If they're holding that back, then actually Trump might not know about that. Trump didn't know supposedly about the Tate brothers coming to effectively Mar-a-Lago by the looks of it. But again, it depends, because he might be lying about that, etc., etc. Anyway, reaction within the US has also been pretty fraught amongst certain people. So pro-Ukraine protests across the US after Trump-Zelensky clash. There are lots of people coming out in various places in support of Zelensky. And indeed, here we have Times Square showing some support for, well, not the square itself, but people in Times Square showing support for Ukraine. Tim White says, I just got tipped off about more protests in New York today too. Am I permitted to laugh? No, okay, just the smirk then. Look at this in Manhattan, double nightmare for Musk, as shouts of Zelensky is a hero ring out at a Tesla showroom. So we also have, and this is also going to be exacerbated by Musk making claims today about the US needing to pull out the UN and NATO. And you got people here calling for Tesla to be boycotted, etc., etc. And protesters then made it into the Tesla showroom. This time, anti-Nazi posters were seen as the song changed to "Nobody Voted for Elon Musk."
Nobody voted for Elon Musk. Nobody voted for Elon Musk. Nobody voted for Elon Musk.
And that is, very connected to the White House interaction, to Trump and Vance's position on Ukraine and with Zelensky. Now, other protests have been much more targeted at the two protagonists in the White House, this time with JD Vance here. Fox News reporting that protesters have disrupted his planned vacation to Vermont following yesterday's fiasco.
Vice President JD Vance and his family following yesterday's fiasco there in the Oval Office with Ukrainian President Zelensky. There's some new video now we have showing the vice president being greeted by protesters holding anti-Vance, pro-Ukraine signs as he makes his way there to Vermont for a ski resort vacation. More protesters met the Vance family outside of the resort, and the family ultimately had to move to an undisclosed location. For Vice President JD.
So interesting there that has happened, and lots of photos coming from there. JD Vance, Zelensky's 10 times a man you are. Trump serves Putin, stand with Ukraine, nobody voted for Putin, Vance disgraces our country, all these kinds of placards. Vance skis in jeans. I'm not quite sure what the point of that is. Vance is a traitor, go ski in Russia, etc., etc. So met at the resort and along the road towards it by
JD Vance and his family.
Do be quiet. By protesters. We have here Edward Hunter Christie saying, yes, Trump and Vance are evil men. It's no coincidence that Orban aside, no European leader, no Canadian leader, no Australian or Japanese leader would ever behave and talk like these two men. It takes deliberate cruelty to act as they did. I think that's absolutely correct there. What else do we have? Trump was impressed by JD Vance's performance during their conflict with Zelensky. He believes his former Vice President Mike Pence would never have defended him the way Vance did, and that's according to the Wall Street Journal. And you can imagine that. You can imagine that Trump would have been, because I don't think this was orchestrated with Trump's knowledge. If it's orchestrated at all, it was done through these other people around him. I mean, you know this by the plant at the beginning, the boyfriend of Marjorie Taylor Greene asking him about his clothing, even though he didn't ask that about Modi, didn't ask that about, Elon Musk in both the Oval Office and the cabinet meeting, but asked it pointedly at the beginning of this whole interaction, and hostilely so as well. Asked it of Zelensky. So I think this was orchestrated, but without Trump's real knowledge. And then Trump hearing JD Vance go off on one like an attack dog on Zelensky and thinks, yeah, this is my man. I like it. So, yeah, absolutely not surprised by this. And no, I don't think Mike Pence would have done that, because Mike Pence is at least somewhat decent. All of my disagreements with him aside. Now, Lula da Silva in Brazil has unfortunately come out in defense of the Trump administration, saying Zelensky's words at the meeting with Trump are damaging to Europe. In the entire history of diplomacy, there's never been a scene as disrespectful as the one we witnessed in the Oval Office of the White House. And I presume he's talking about Zelensky there. Now, Paul Rieckhoff, the founder and CEO of the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, said this, and I'm absolutely on board with this.
It wasn't just a mistake, it was an ambush. I mean, this was a plan. This was a politically calculated ambush from all sides, right? No one would feel comfortable walking into an environment like that from any country, and no one should be treated that way. From the reporter to the greeting to the mocking of his clothes, it was beneath America and beneath the White House to treat a guest in our country and a leader who is actively engaged in combat, who is right now losing his fellow service members. He's losing his women and children. His cities are being bombed. And we're talking about his clothes, and we're talking to him that way. It was victim shaming, which is what Trump has been doing to Zelensky in Ukraine since before he got elected. It's
And just to interrupt in there, because this is a point I made very strongly with the live stream with Jonathan Fink yesterday, which is that if Trump and Vance were at all interested in peace for Ukraine, I mean, if that was really what was driving them, they would be signing a peace deal irrespective of whether Zelensky spoke a bit rudely, right, in their eyes. Right? You're really interested in peace, and you're like, well, this is unfortunate, but it's most important that we get the peace deal done, which is what they keep kind of saying. It's all about we want peace, we want peace. But as soon as there's a tiff, they're like, well, peace deal's off, because it's more important than we have some performative, I guess, performative exhibition as to how Zelensky's a bad dude, right? So therefore we can't do peace. Well, then you're not really interested in doing peace. You're more interested in this whole thing here, which is a vehicle to get you what? A trade deal with Russia and to get you against Europe. That's more important. That's what's driving things. So, like, Trump is not interested in peace. He couldn't really care. He wants I think a Nobel Peace Prize. He's interested in material gain for him, and that's what's driving his performances at the moment. And I think that is most eloquently expressed here in a different way by this veteran.
What Trump has been doing to Zelensky in Ukraine since before he got elected, it's unacceptable, it's inappropriate, and it's also undermining not just Ukraine, but our own national security. We are now aligned with the bad guys. Russia is the bad guy, Ukraine is the good guy. And when we continue to attack Ukraine and defend Russia, that puts us in line with the bad guys, which is not where America wants to be.
Well, it's very clear. Repeat of the American allegiances.
It wasn't just a mistake.
Absolutely agree with that 100%. I'm sorry it's only coming out of one ear. Right, so Barely Politics goes, I'm sorry, what now? You do realise that these so what happened then is Lindsey Graham came out and was hugely in support of Trump and his administration, and it was all pretty, I think, controversial. I've got some more on Lindsey Graham here. In fact, let's go to talk about Lindsey Graham in a short while, because that needs to be back there, in my humble opinion. We've got some Lindsey Graham stuff later. Let me just get that in order. Yeah, so let's get some reaction from, first of all, some Democratic politicians. Then there are a couple of Republicans who have come out in public. Representative Don Bacon has been pretty critical. Lisa Murkowski we're going to go to. But first we're going to listen to, I think, Seth Moulton. Every American I've heard from today is embarrassed, including a lot of veterans, by this draft-dodging commander-in-chief who wants to sell us out to Putin and be Putin's puppet.
The American people first looks like, and he thanked Trump and he thanked Vance for standing up for our nation. And that's what they said. This is the us versus them, that it's America first. That's
really, because every American I've heard from is embarrassed, including a lot of veterans, completely embarrassed by this draft-dodging commander-in-chief who wants to sell us out to Putin and be Putin's puppet, to this pogue, coward vice president who's never even bothered to visit Ukraine. I mean, Lindsey Graham's been to Ukraine several times. I've been to Ukraine. Can't even bother to visit as a member of Congress to understand what's going on the ground, to understand why we're spending American taxpayer dollars defending NATO, defending our allies, and preventing preventing Putin from running all over Europe, including the American troops in Europe. I don't know who these Republicans are talking to, but they're not talking to freedom-loving Americans. They're not talking to people who fight and stand up for American values like Ukraine is doing. They apparently want to side with dictators. And I'll tell you, in private, like when I was at the Munich Security Conference, sitting with Lindsey Graham and others, meeting with Zelensky, they're all on the same page. we're all on the same page.
Absolutely.
About wanting to support the right side of this conflict.
Well, what kind of things are
They're
they
just
saying
so
there?
scared.
They're saying different
They're
things
so
there,
scared of
you're
Donald
saying?
Trump, they can't tell the truth.
But you're
This is so true. Is that people will say Republicans will say one thing in private and then come out and say something else in public because they know they have to toe the party line.
saying specifically Lindsey Graham was saying different things there than he said today.
Oh, come on. That doesn't take it.
Right, but
you don't need Sherlock Holmes
you're
to
saying
figure that out.
no, but specifically Senator
Lindsey
Graham,
Graham
you're
changes
saying,
his
right.
story every time Donald Trump changes his story. We've seen that for years.
Absolutely true there. Right, so moving on to get another view. This is Chris Murphy. Now, watch out for Chris Murphy. I think he's going to be a big contender for president in the next presidential elections. I think he's positioning himself fairly well at the moment. But anyway, that's just an aside. MAGA is making the claim that if you watch the entire 50-minute video, Zelensky is the antagonist. This isn't true at all. I was with Zelensky before the meeting, and it's important to know what his mindset was heading in. A short thread on how the entire ambush went down. You cannot erase the context. Trump has been calling Zelensky a corrupt dictator and spreading Russian propaganda that Russia didn't invade Ukraine. All these lies are Trump's pretext to sign a deal with Russia that hands Ukraine to Putin. Zelensky knows this. Zelensky, who's been cut out of the talks, knows that Trump and Putin are scheming. A ceasefire without any guarantees for Ukraine's future security is a trap. Trump's deal will require Ukrainian forces to withdraw, and when they do, Putin will pounce. It's a setup. So it's true that the first 40 minutes or so of the meeting look cordial, but listen to Trump. He keeps repeating that he's going to impose on Zelensky this fake ceasefire without any weapons to Ukraine, without any security guarantees, without any way to enforce it. So at the 40-minute mark, Vance chimes in. He appears agitated. He says that Trump's fake ceasefire is the only way. All that happens at this point is that Zelensky asks Vance a simple, calm question. Zelensky isn't being rude, and here's the essence of the question. Putin has signed many agreements about Ukraine and he hasn't honoured any of them. Aren't you worried Putin will violate the terms of this ceasefire? And that's it. That's the question. And this is where Vance and Trump explode. The trap was set and now the ambush starts. Vance, visibly angry, calls Zelensky disrespectful for asking his simple question and then starts listing Russian talking points about how weak the Ukrainian army is and how poor a leader Zelensky is. It's a Vance that takes a cordial meeting to a hostile one. You've seen the clips that follow, but the whole meeting is a setup. By pushing the plan to hand Ukraine to Putin in front of Zelensky, Trump is trying to either humiliate or provoke Zelensky, but he does neither, and so Vance has to light the match. Of course, Zelensky had to make his point that Putin won't honour the ceasefire. He does it diplomatically with a question to Vance, likely so as to not directly confront Trump on TV. And then Vance sees the chance. He commences the ambush. The whole thing was a setup. Really interesting there. Now, Lisa Murkowski, the Republican senator from Alaska, says, or representing Alaska, this week started with administration officials refusing to acknowledge that Russia started the war in Ukraine. It ends with a tense, shocking conversation in the Oval Office and whispers from the White House that they may try to end all US support for Ukraine. I know foreign policy is not for the faint of heart, but right now I'm sick to my stomach as the administration appears to be walking away from our allies and embracing Putin, a threat to world democracy and US values around the world. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. Well done, Senator Lisa Murkowski. I wish you were stronger with some of the nominees, but please, 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 can other Republicans follow suit here? It's super, super important. And then we've got Vindman here calling out someone else that is a pro-MAGA positioning wingnut, and we've got Vindman, whose connections to Ukraine and the armed forces as well, calling him out.
Well, that's what he's been trying to do. And I disagree with everything that the lieutenant colonel has been saying. You know, I'm just some simple Indiana boy, but when I watched this event today, I want to know why our ally is allowed to disrespect the United States of America, the leader, the current leader of this free world.
Vance owes
Zelensky
finish. An apology. President Trump owes Zelensky an apology for the way he was treated.
For what?
I demand it.
What?
I demand that they give
you demand. Okay.
Brilliant. So this is about switching it. I'm sorry that the audio isn't great, but he's saying, no, I demand that Trump and Vance give Zelensky an apology. Don't come here and tell me that Zelensky needs to apologize to them. They need to apologize to him.
UN resolution number 2.
You're going to go ahead and say preposterous things like Zelensky owes an apology for being attacked. I'm going to go ahead and say something outrageous. Actually, I'm going to go ahead.
Price of you say that Ukraine wants peace.
I think JD Vance should resign. How about that? We're just going to go through crazy stuff into there.
You say Ukraine. Well, that's what he's.
Absolutely brilliant. Yeah, I think JD Vance should resign. And you've had other people coming out saying, so John Bolton, the former national security advisor, saying that actually here's a time for Marco Rubio and Mike Waltz to resign. He's called for them to resign because actually he thinks that their hearts aren't really in it. They are towing the party line, but they've said so many things previously, particularly Marco Rubio, against what they're saying now, that they can't really seriously be comfortable with saying what they're saying presently, and now's the time to get out and show the world actually what is the right approach to this, and or at least what's a wrong approach, which is the Trumpian approach. Fascinating, right? So yeah, here we go. John Bolton's called on Marco Rubio and Mike Waltz to resign. Are you saying they should resign? Yeah, and Mike Waltz. This is really the time to do it. If they don't get out now, I think their reputations will suffer for a long, long time. And I agree with that. I agree. If Marco Rubio really does have serious intentions on the White House, he's doing quite a lot of damage to himself at the moment. I mean, it depends how long MAGA get to represent republicanism in the United States. Now, this is how Fox News is reacting, and this is something we're going to look at in slightly more detail now.
Luxembourg doesn't have the weapons to give them.
I think we got to get back to the central point. I think the most important point that Donald Trump made in this whole thing. He said, you are gambling with World War III.
Yep.
This was about peace, ultimately. There's a lot of drama, and we can break down everybody's feelings. But in the end, I think what's remarkable is that we have a president who's willing to do anything to bring about world peace. Man, if he doesn't get the Nobel Peace Prize after this, it means nothing.
And he was giving Zelensky.
If he doesn't get the Nobel Peace Prize after this, it means nothing. Good God, woman. You think his absolutely monstrous lack of empathy and morality is the basis for the Nobel Peace Prize? And goodness me, you're seriously confused. So Decoding Fox News says a thread on how Fox News covered Trump's disastrous attempt at the mineral peace deal with Ukrainian President Zelensky before the Oval Office meeting. Fox News hosts bragged that Trump has ended the Ukraine war within 3 weeks into his presidency. So this is something they said, and you can go and listen to this video there where they're talking about, yep, he's ended Ukraine war, well done, this is all now formality type thing. So the Oval Office visit, Zelensky explains that Putin has broken promises and ceasefires 25 times since 2014. Europe has been generous with their support for Ukraine. A reporter asks him why he doesn't wear a suit. Zelensky reminds Trump that Putin invaded Ukraine. Trump boasts that he has not taken a side, but he shows sympathy towards Russia. Putin has suffered because of the Russia hoax. Trump's comments about Ukraine sound like his very fine people on both sides speech about Charlottesville and the neo-Nazis marching there. JD Vance starts a fight when he tells Zelensky to try diplomacy. Zelensky responds saying Putin cannot be trusted and breaks ceasefires. Vance thinks Zelensky has disrespected President Trump. Trump didn't know when the war started. The meeting turns into a full-blown fight between Zelensky and Trump claims Zelensky has no cards leverage. Zelensky wants a security guarantee. Trump thinks a written agreement is enough. Zelensky has disrespected the Oval Office. Now, on the 5, with Jesse Waters, the US, that's the one I showed you before, where he says the US runs the world, etc., etc. Jessica Tarlov, who is awesome on there, said 70% of the aid the US has sent to Ukraine goes back to the US defense contractors. Europe spends a larger percentage of their GDP than the US does. Diplomacy is messy. So she's the only one on the 5. The other 4 are just completely in cahoots and beholden to Trump. Brett Baer then interviews Zelensky, and in that interview, the Ukrainian president thanks the American people. Zelensky wants peace. The Russians killed so many people. Trump exaggerated things about the war. Lindsey Graham throws Zelensky under the bus, and Brett Baer asks for an apology to Trump. The Ingram angle, so this is Laura Ingram, who absolutely loves Trump. The pro-war hawk crowd lost their cause. Zelensky disrespected Trump. MAGA will turn on Ukraine. The Oval Office meeting was not a setup or an ambush. Russia, playing golf with Trump. Elon Musk also doesn't wear suits. Are these points, but she's very much in support of the Trump position, and also talking about Lindsey Graham and his response as well. And we'll come on to that in a second. Then Jesse Waters comes back on prime time. Zelensky met the fashion police. The US is in charge. NATO doesn't want Ukraine. Russia won't invade under Trump. Stephen Miller worships Trump. Every American's heart swelled with pride to watch Trump yell at Zelensky. And this is kind of all the stuff that's going on. This is all distilled. Hannity then is on. Zelensky should wear a suit. Trump was gracious. Who needs a security agreement? Victor Davis Hansen says Zelensky should be like Bibi Netanyahu. Clay Travis says Trump is a good guy. Joe Concha says Zelensky looks like he dressed for a disco. That's how it's being reported by Fox News, and then you go back to, say, Sky News, and you see that actually it's a much more measured approach, and there is universal discomfort in what happened at the White House, and the opinion is outside of Fox News is that Trump and Vance were the ones who were hugely disrespectful. Then you had this Lindsey Graham response, who is so he said either Zelensky should resign or something needs to happen, and it just shows that I think Lindsey Graham is compromised, and that they rolled him out because he's been someone that's met Zelensky a number of times. In fact, he met him before the talks in the White House to try and prep him. And then Lindsey Graham came out and then blamed Zelensky and not Trump and Vance, which was always going to happen. This is, again, Vindman.
Territories. So Lindsey Graham is an absolute coward because Trump did not sound strong. He was attacking a ally when he didn't need to. This was just Zelensky, saying that Trump can't trust Putin. That's all he was saying. That was the argument. That's how the argument got started. And JD Vance, I mean, he looked like an absolute clown. I don't understand why Trump allowed Vance to blow up his deal. I mean, the deal was there. The initial.
Because he didn't really want the deal, because actually he's getting better deals from Russia, and Zelensky wants security guarantees, and Trump is not ready to give them.
So part of the press conference was totally fine. They both had their comments, a series of questions unfolded. And then when it came around to whether Putin could be trusted, Zelensky said, no, they've constantly broken the deal. And Vance took that as the opportunity to side again with Putin and criticize Zelensky, and he blew up Trump's deal. Territories.
And in that same interview, he also says that Lindsey Graham is an absolute coward, and Trump didn't sound strong. Right. So then we had Lindsey Graham then saying that there's this European hand-wringing, and he comes out and says and slags off Europe and says how wonderful Trump and Vance are and how terrible Zelensky did and that he should resign. So Barely Politics goes, I'm sorry, what now? You really do realise that these hand-wringing Europeans. So what's the actual quote from? Let's find that quote from Zelensky. Sorry, from Lindsey Graham. Yeah, so this is it from a tweet, actually. To the hand-wringing Europeans who felt offended by President Trump rejecting being lectured by President Zelensky, be my guest to defend Ukraine from Putin. It is long past the time for Europeans to show they are capable of defending their own continent. They've allowed their militaries to be hollowed out, and when Europe speaks, no bad guy listens. I say this with great sadness. The last group of people that I would count on to defend freedom are the Europeans. So you can imagine this has gone down fairly badly with some people. And indeed, as I was going to say, this is Barely Politics' response. You do realise that these hand-wringing Europeans have spent the last 70 years turning up to fight America's wars, right? Let me take you on a little trip down memory lane, one littered with wreckage of American diplomacy, since your grasp on history seems shakier than Orangina's grip on the ramp. Korea, over 60,000 British troops deployed alongside US forces, along with 5,000 Turks plus French, Dutch and Greek contingents. Europeans bled and died on the same battlefields as Americans. The Gulf War, the UK sent 35,000 troops, France deployed 18,000, Italy, Netherlands and others contributed. Europeans stood shoulder to shoulder with the US to push Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait. Afghanistan, the NATO mission led at various points by hand-wringing European commanders like General Sir David Richards, General Egon Rams and General Jean-Louis P. Saw thousands of British, Dutch, Danish, Polish and other European troops deployed year after year. Britain alone sent 150,000 troops. A European-led force fought in a war the US started and then, of course, abandoned, leaving the Taliban to waltz back in. Iraq, the UK sent 46,000 troops. Poland commanded a whole multinational division with 2,500 of its own. Italy contributed 3,200, Denmark 500. These weren't token gestures. There were boots on the ground in a war built on lies your government peddled. So tell me, Lindsay, at what point did hand-wringing Europeans stop pulling their weight? When exactly did they become too weak to defend their own continent, given that they'd spent the last 70 years showing up every time America blundered into another conflict? Was it when thousands of British, French, Dutch and Polish troops fought in Helmand, Kandahar and Kabul? Or was it when European soldiers were deployed in Iraq to clean up the mess from the invasion the US justified with fabricated intelligence? Or maybe it was when European nations actually upheld their NATO commitments while Trump had an adolescent tantrum about them, and Republicans fell over themselves to kiss Putin's ring. It takes a special kind of ignorance to pretend Trump hasn't fought alongside the US time and time again. But then again, considering how the Republican Party now prefers surrendering to Russia over standing with its allies, maybe this historical amnesia isn't so surprising after all. And of course, that's what he's responding to below. I should have seen that before. But absolutely right. I think Lindsey Graham is a pathetic coward here. Terrible. But do you know what? Tucker Carlson is coming in, of course, on behalf of Lindsey Graham. One of the most striking things, says Tucker Carlson, I need to empty that spittoon, about yesterday's Zelensky press conference was Lindsey Graham's reaction to it. The two are old friends, but Graham disavowed him within an hour. Yeah, well, when you know how much compromise on Lindsey Graham and how under the thumb he is, then it's completely unsurprising. The two are old friends, but Graham disavowed him within the hour. This was more than just transactional disloyalty. It was scapegoating. Lindsey Graham knows what's coming over the past 3 years. With the tacit support of its Western patrons, the Ukrainian government has committed a remarkable number of serious crimes. The Ukrainians sold huge quantities of American weapons on the international black market, not true. At 20 cents on the dollar, not true. These weapons are now in the hands of armed groups around the world, including Hamas, not true. The Mexican drug cartels, not true, ridiculous. And the forces now controlling Syria, not true. God knows what the Ukrainians have done with the pathogens in American biolabs in their country, not true, ridiculous, shut up. Even US intelligence agencies aren't sure. The Ukrainians have also murdered a number of people in various countries in political assassinations and tried to murder others, including American journalists and a European head of state. This is all propaganda. This is all true. No, it's not. And it's all going to come out at some point. Better to start blaming it on Zelensky now. Of course, this is disgusting, but what you are seeing is the MAGA republicanism a la Tucker Carlson is starting to take hold more formally in the White House. And this is completely unsurprising, but really quite depressing. Good to see others like this is former Alabama Senator Doug Jones weighing in on this.
The president has made the United States of America the greatest country in the history of this planet. He's made us look weak, silly, run by a couple of junior high school kids who would rather argue in a locker room than discuss and have negotiations for peace and security and again, democracy and freedom. It was a setup. There's no question about it. If you look at Senator Graham's comments, you look at some of the other Republicans in Congress, he accomplishes what he wants to do, and that is drive a wedge between the Congress and the president of Ukraine, drive a wedge between his supporters and President Zelensky. Never, ever forget this moment when American foreign policy was shredded, when diplomacy was shredded, when democracy got shredded in the one place that it should be preserved, the Oval Office, the White House, the office of the President of the United States. The president has made the United States of America the greatest country in the history of this planet. He's made us look weak.
And there you go. Sorry to play the beginning of that. So that's his reaction to what happened. Now, I love this. So SNL have done some brilliant stuff. Their whole skit is fantastic. Let's just play the beginning of it here, or part of it here.
You should come visit Ukraine.
Hey, don't you even dare. I've been to Ukraine on Google Maps. It's a mess. You think you're getting any money from us after your little outburst today? To quote my personal hero, Willy Wonka, you broke the rules! You get nothing! You lose! Good day, sir!
And you know what? You're not even wearing a suit. It's disrespectful. Who shows up to the White House in a t-shirt and jeans like a garbage person?
Mike Myers.
Hi guys. Elon, we love your outfit. Very official and respectful. And I love when he gets that chainsaw right next to my head.
Thanks. Donald, what are you doing in my office? You know I'm the president now, right? I'm kidding. Okay, maybe not. Maybe not.
So on and so forth. Excellent. But this is the one I love, where he's like talking about being thanked, and we're going to talk about that in a second. Oh, it is coming.
Mr. President, with all due respect.
Excuse me? I'm sorry, what? I'm sorry, I have to jump in here because that's how we planned this. Thank you, okay? Remember thank you? You haven't said thank you to us once in the past 15 seconds I've been yelling at you.
I said thank you.
You didn't say it now, but you didn't say it now when you walked in here. You didn't say thank you. You didn't say anything about us being handsome. Who are my handsome little boys? You didn't ask us that once.
Look, he's right. And we're very handsome, okay? And yet you don't compliment the ties. You don't say thank you. You don't tell us how hot we look, okay? You don't say, if I was gay, I'd be all over you too. Okay, and we're supposed to help you?
But if I could just say...
You have been talking this entire time.
That absolutely brilliant, and that sums it up for me really well. But there's been a lot to say about this kind of thanking thing. So Michael McFaul, the previous ambassador or a former ambassador to Russia, says Vice President Vance asked for a thank you on an aid package he voted against. This administration also, and this is so important. So comedy aside, this is the nub of it. He's asking for thanks for something that Vance voted against, right? And he's told Zelensky that he, 1, has to give up parts of his country to Putin, 2, can't join NATO, 3, has to pay back the US for past aid, and 4, there will be no new aid. So, like, what does he have to be thankful about to Vance? The American people deserve a thank you and have received it from Zelensky many times. In fact, there's so many people have come up with all the times he's thanked, either in video time or in like tweet images and whatnot. Trump and Vance wanted Zelensky to thank them for an aid package that Vance voted against and Trump opposed. That's how ridiculous this is. So yeah, I think that's a really important point to make. It's just like, seriously expecting him to thank you for that situation. Absolutely incredible. Anyway, going back to Trump here, what really bothered Trump, it seems, was a criticism of Putin. So let's listen to Trump.
I want to make peace. He doesn't have to stand there and say about Putin this, Putin that, and all negative things. He's got to say, I want to make peace. I don't want to fight a war any longer.
So he can't say negative things about Putin, who's, murdering his civilians and executing his POW. I mean, this is absolutely unconscionable here from Trump. I don't even want to hear the rest of it. But then Petro Poroshenko has come out. Now, he doesn't like Zelensky at all, right? He is a political enemy of Zelensky, but he's come out and said, and speaking about the meeting, said, quote, half the country couldn't sleep last night after watching the videos from Washington. We are all holding our breath for Ukraine. Everyone's asking what comes next. Some expecting me to criticize Zelensky, but no, there'll be no criticism because that's not what the country needs right now. 100% awesome there. And it's insane to think that the Trump administration was more welcoming this week to the Tate brothers than to the president of Ukraine. Let that sit with you. I almost was going to show you some of the videos of the Tate brothers abusing women, like literally on video that are horrific, right? Just to give you a proper sense, a visceral sense of what I mean here. But honestly, be aware that the Trump administration has effectively welcomed the Tate brothers, these sexual abuse and trafficking perpetrators accused of that in both Romania and the UK. They've welcomed the Tate brothers to the US more warmly than they have President Zelensky. It is absolutely incredible. And as we get towards the end, Gary Kasparov, in reaction to Marco Rubio, towing the party line here. So Marco Rubio came out and said, and he said it with gusto as well, like verbally on TV. Thank you, POTUS, for standing up for America in a way that no president has ever had the courage to do before. Thank you for putting America first. America is with you. It sounds like that was written for him. But anyway, Gary Kasparov says, no other president, I can think of a few, and they stood up for America against enemies, not allies. Little Marco, let's see Trump stand up to Putin if you want to impress more. absolutely great point there. And it's then fascinating to see the evil Gherkin, who's in prison, who's an ultra-nationalist and wants to see the destruction of Ukraine, but criticised the Russian government for not doing it well enough and ended up in prison. So Zelensky, quote, Zelensky greatly humiliated Trump and Vance in the front of the mainstream American media, in front of all America. In the Oval Office in the White House, Trump is, in his exceptionally boorish cowboy manner, tried to humiliate Zelensky. Instead, he got the exact opposite result. Interesting. I don't know what it means, that coming from him, but I do agree with him. Europe will collectively try to pick up the pieces after Zelensky's meeting with Trump, but it looks like Trump has decided to sell Ukraine out, says Bloomberg. And that's it. So what we are going to see is whether Europe is able to take the reins from the US and keep the US on side so that they don't just rush into the warm embrace of Vladimir Putin. I'm going to leave you with this. Winston Churchill in the White House. I wonder if he got yelled at for not wearing a suit. Everyone seems to be happy in recording him in that way. In fact, it was quite the photo opportunity. And interesting, Churchill didn't hold elections for 9 or 10 years over the Second World War because, of the Second World War. And they weren't even invaded. And he didn't get called a dictator. In fact, his bust was overseeing the conversation between Zelensky and Trump and Vance. And I wonder what he would be thinking now, seeing that absolute disgrace taking place in the White House. Anyway, that's kind of some of the reaction, some views on the White House interaction there. I'm really pleased, again, personally, from a UK point of view, that we have a fairly unified response to that. I was listening to people like my partner's parents and even my dad now, who was a Trump. My dad, because he's massively Brexit and I'm not. I'm a Remainer. He was a Leaver, and we've had this. He always likes to have digs at me all the time, but he's also taken to liking Trump, right, in a way that very many. In fact, my mum says, I can't believe when we go for these coffee mornings, he is the only person, and this is a very conservative area, right? He's the only person that likes Trump, like in all of the whole place. So people need to realise that Trump support in the UK, for example, is very, very, very much lower than in the United States. And the view of Trump from outside of Trump world is usually pretty damned critical. Now, my dad was like the only single, but even my partner's parents, who are real Brexiteers, real Leavers, they don't like Trump, right? And that's actually quite common. Although Reform, as we know, Reform voters have more of a support for Trump than any other party. But my dad now hates Trump. So after what happened, actually just before the White House thing, it was the minerals deal and essentially seeing Trump change sides. Even my dad was like, I hate him, and he was effing and jeffing at him. He's getting dementia now, so he's starting to lose those inhibitions. But he was effing and jeffing about Trump, and now, even more so. So trying to get a sense of how people feel abroad. Essentially, if you are like a pro-Russian, Viktor Orban loving, total Eurosceptic, you might see Trump as, and you already hate Ukraine. If you're already in that area, then you're going to think Trump did the right thing there. But anyone who has any at least vague support for Ukraine is seeing Trump and Vance as the bad guys in that. And that is reflected in even the Daily Mail and the Daily Express, both papers that my dad reads, by the way, being really critical of Trump. And if you lose the Mail and the Express in the UK, that is a barometer for universality of an opinion. So take that for however you want to, but I find that really, really pertinent. And we're now looking at Europe circling the wagons with Zelensky and Starmer in London. We're going to see what happens there. It's going to be fascinating to see how the American public deal with this, and whether this will come back and bite Trump on the arse, or whether he will just ignore it and just sit in that bubble where everyone's telling him it's all great, and maybe not communicating that outside of Trump world in Europe and elsewhere around the world, Trump is seen negatively for actions like this. Anyway, let me know what you think. I'd be very, very interested. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.